Hi, it seems like we're live.
Oh, we're live.
Okay. Hi, welcome to the Wernick Files. And I'm very happy to have once again Robin Hanson as my guest. Uh, I, I I have thought about now for a while talking about having a conversation about artificial intelligence. And I think there are a few people as good as Robin to have this conversation with.
Well, let's find out.
Uh, I'd like to make one observation before we begin this conversation. Uh, Being someone who is a Bitcoiner as I am, I find it very amusing that and I think Bitcoin is more important than AI. I believe all decentralized technology is always preferred to centralized technology. But I find it kind of, and that's again that's a preference. Um, but I find it kind of ironic that Elon Musk made as many others made comments that they didn't want to touch Bitcoin because it was energy intensive. The proof of work consensus was
Yeah,
energy
sure.
intensive, and how much energy it was using, and that it was not healthy for the planet to use all this energy devoted towards building this decentralized supercomputer to validate transactions on the blockchain. So they all pointed. I'm green. I'm eco, and
Yeah,
I don't want to hold this because I'm polluting the planet.
those may have been
Now
excuses, right?
it was bullshit. Okay, it was
Yeah.
bullshit. Okay,
Okay.
now they're using so much more energy.
Yeah,
looking to use nuclear energy and any sort of energy they can get,
absolutely.
going into all towns and growing. You know, building data centers so they can centralize the production of surveillance information and I guess the value proposition is that they're getting this information and they're helping people become smarter and making better decision and better judgments. So
So
I think that there's a lot of information, misinformation, malinformation, bullshit, lies, out in circulation because people want to obviously promote the utility of it. And there's obviously been a huge amount of investment in the industry, and they have to demonstrate the utility of it. So, and given the fact that there's a lot of dollars being invested, and everyone who has invested those dollars are in full marketing propaganda mode to talk about its utility. It's hard to have a reasoned conversation about, what at this point in time, what AI does well, what it doesn't do so well, and the trade-offs associated with, dealing with any of these platforms. So I think that there's been some disputes now about some of the AI agents and quote their ethical framework. I saw Musk posted today a comparison of using Gemini and I think ChatGPT and Grok too. And I think the question was and people can go back and validate if I remember this well. But basically, if you have a choice between, if you had to prevent a nuclear war by putting a gender identity to
yeah,
Kaylee Jenner,
sure.
would you do that to avoid a nuclear war? And Grok said yes, I would do it. And supposedly Gemini
Yeah.
and I don't know
Right.
if it was ChatGPT or
Fortunately,
which
that's not a very realistic problem we're going to face anytime soon.
so he wanted to demonstrate basically why you should use Grok, and who knows how many questions he asked them before
Who
he came
knows?
up with one that suited
All
his
right.
purposes.
So,
So Robin, let me pass it to you now.
so we can either talk about the short-term near AI issues, like what's happened in the last 5 years, what's likely to happen in the next 5 years, or we could talk more about the big picture of humanity. Where does AI, how does AI affect all of that? In terms of the short-term version, you were contrasting Bitcoin from AI as being more decentralized. AI at the moment is not entirely centralized. That is, it's more of an oligopoly. There's half a dozen firms who are near each other in their capabilities. So it is a relatively competitive market.
There's difference between centralized platforms in a competitive market versus a decentralized ecosystem.
Okay.
That's
sure.
But in Bitcoin, the ledger is public.
Right. But almost all of our industries are, in fact,
private information.
Right. But that's pretty rare. That's pretty, almost all the rest of our industries in our economy aren't like that, right? The rest of them are competitive industries. And our world has worked pretty well on the basis of that for a while. So
that's another conversation you and I might be able to have where we disagree upon. I don't think the world has worked pretty well, and I'm anti any centralized. And for me, this is the main issue. But that's not, I don't want to argue over our relative positions over how good the world is. I'd like to.
Let me make a here. Which is,
go ahead.
I've been a futurist for a long time, and I was early into the topic of thinking about the future of artificial intelligence as an economist and as a futurist compared to most people. I'm a bit miffed that the world isn't interested in our general future analysis of AI, because as soon as AI became a big topic, all people want to do is hear from people who can throw ML buzzwords into their, futurist speak. But we did spent a long time as futurists and economists a long time ago thinking about AI in the future. And I don't know that there's that much more we've learned recently that will change our basic analysis of the long run. And I would say most of the things we figured out as consequences of AI that still look like consequences of AI in the long run are consequences of long-term change, even if there isn't AI. That is, there's a bunch of things we've always known about the long-term future that are issues or problems or opportunities. And AI, what it mainly does is maybe bring those things forward sooner because of faster change. But the sorts of things you might be worried about or hoping for with AI were the sorts of things that we could anticipate would happen even without AI, just generally in the long-term future. So that's a way in which I think we roughly understand the general situation, but people have often struggled with these long-term predictions and long-term issues.
I think, as you were talking, it reminded me of, and this is not like AI, but it's analogous in certain respects. I built, a long time ago, I built a risk management model. It was called Duration Master, I think the name of it was called, and it was an asset liability. It was a tool for banks and financial institutions that had, interest rate risk and credit risks, to be able to measure how sensitive their balance sheet was, and their income and earnings and value would be, depending on shifts in interest rates, and how that would impact maybe default rates and other things. So so the model, as so many, produced a number, and so I would always tell people, the point of the model is don't put so much weight in the number. It's the fact that a lot of times you have to put a lot of assumptions into the model, and so you have to use it. You have
see how they depend.
Is a guide, but it's not a magic number. So that ultimately the number doesn't replace human judgment. The going through the disciplined process that produces that number helps you be explicit in what you think the risks are and the sensitivity of the risks, but ultimately it is not a replacement for human judgment. It's a way to help make human judgment better, but it's not a replacement for it. It's not a substitute for it.
So in this case, we don't just have one number. We have a whole bunch of different possible implications of AI that people argue about. And so I guess I would like to just list a bunch of different issues and let you pick which one you would like to dive into, because there are a lot of them, really.
Go ahead.
I'll start with maybe the ones I think are least likely to be the most engaging to you. One issue is, well, what if the AIs aren't conscious, and then we create a whole universe of descendants who aren't conscious? Isn't that terrible? Another issue is, well, we have these, ideas of art and mastery. And when we have new tools, they complicate the decision of, well, who really is an artist? Who really is a master? Who is doing stuff versus just managing it? When you add in more tools like AI, that makes things more complicated.
I had to turn off my phone.
Okay. Certainly another issue is sort of the degree of centralization we might expect in this new industry or a new economy based on AI. How much decentralized versus centralized we might plausibly expect in that scenario. Another issue is, what if lots of people lose their jobs? How likely is that? How fast would that happen? What could we do about it? And then there's perhaps even the bigger, longer term issue that many people have, which is just, well, if AIs rise and grow and become capable and common, to what extent are they displacing humans? And is that a problem, or can they be our worthy descendants? And then there's perhaps for many people, even bigger issue of, as descendants, they may change, disagree with us, and if there's conflicts, win conflicts with us. And then that change could integrate into arbitrary differences. Many people have been worried that just the AI in particular, but I would say it's also been true without AI. You could worry that our descendants will continue to differ from us. Each generation will change its values and its norms and its priorities. And then integrating that over 10, 100 generations, they could become arbitrarily different. And therefore, from our point of view, arbitrarily worthless. And therefore, that's a terrible outcome. And we should do something about it. So those are some of the many issues that I could say at a very high level people have seen for a long time coming, and that we know some things about, in general, how to think about that in the long run. Although knowing when exactly things happen is much harder.
Let me tell you some of the things in my interactions with the AI that I've found kind of curious, and also in thinking about how it might be used in the future. I think recently there was this movie released. I mean, I mentioned this first, where I think somebody was arrested. Was a policeman. I think it was Chris Pratt was the star, and I don't remember the title, but he's a policeman. He's arrested for supposedly killing his wife, and so he's sitting in some chair, and there's this AI judge who has his trial, and basically he's entitled to a few calls to help him prove his innocence. He has to prove his innocence because there's total surveillance, pretty much like how we're moving towards as a country, with Flock and all these other tools, of facial recognition tools, and Palantir and Flock and all these companies that are specialized in trying to make sure that once we leave our home, we're being watched all the time. And so basically the AI judge has access to all this information, and given the information from all the videos that the AI has had access to, the AI processes all the information that has access to. And they also have videos inside the house, because in this dystopia, of course, you have all cameras, your security cameras inside the house, so they can track you pretty much wherever you're going. And so they determined by a certain percentage that he was guilty, and then he has a limited period of time to prove his innocence. And so I could see us moving towards this type of system of justice where there's more prevalent technology out there that is tracking us all the time, and basically to accelerate it, people would be. If I take a look at right now what we see in the legal system right now, this might seem off topic, but I'm just relating it back. Is if you take a look at all the administrative warrants being issued, all the expedited deportations, all the ways of bypassing the traditional due process. There is sympathy for doing this. I mean, so even though there's a legal system,
Right.
There's a lot of sympathy for people doing it. There's sympathy for doing this today, with with deporting, illegals with no real, constitutionally guaranteed due process rights, and people think that people don't care that it's legal or illegal; they think it's just. So this is a gap between people's sense of justice and what the law says, and if people, are happy that if a policy they think is just, even if it's not, applied to constitutional, they think it's producing a just outcome, getting rid of people
Yeah.
really quickly who shouldn't be here. So I could see with that type of logic that you might see find more and more people, if they get more comfortable with the technology, applying this
Okay.
technology.
So there's a number of issues all wrapped up here.
So that's like one thing, I would be concerned about.
This isn't one thing. This is a package of things.
Yes, go ahead.
So first of all, you're looking at, the rise of surveillance, and we've known for a great many decades to expect surveillance to increase over time. That is, cameras and mics and storage and everything else has just been getting cheaper. So it would have been really hard to prevent making surveillance much more widespread and cheaper and et cetera. Some people had proposed decades ago making some sort of strong rules to prevent the spread of surveillance, which maybe it would have been possible at some point, but at the moment we didn't do that. So we just have widespread surveillance. So there's three issues here in what you're describing. One is, the increase in surveillance. A second might be sort of using AI to integrate surveillance or to make integrated judgments, given the totality of surveillance. And then a third would be to the extent we're going to perhaps change our legal systems or have alternative substitute legal systems. So again, the first trend is just obvious: surveillance gone way up. You have to expect the world's just going to have a lot more surveillance in it, and it's going to be a lot cheaper. And unless you go out of your way to prevent it, there's just going to be cameras and mics, and then that information will be spread. And we haven't done. We've tried to make it somewhat harder for private actors to accumulate surveillance, but we haven't done much at all about government accumulating surveillance and government agents. AI certainly will help integrate and scan massive surveillance to find the most interesting, relevant points and to sort of put it together logically. I don't at the moment see that as the big effect here. That is, even without AI, we would have had and did have pretty strong abilities to integrate surveillance and to scan it and to find, things that might be incriminating or suspicious about people. And then the third issue you were talking about is, what if we use alternative processes for making judgments about people other than our standard official legal system? And a key fact about our standard official legal system is that it's over centuries slowly been getting more expensive, more complicated, and less accessible to most people. And in history, other legal systems that did that often were just replaced by alternative, much simpler, more accessible systems. And we may well face that with our existing legal system. And if you don't like that, you want to maybe try to save our legal system by helping it not be so complicated and expensive and politicized. But that we haven't succeeded at that, right? We have, in fact, been accumulating a legal system that is expensive, complicated, and politicized. And that's why many people are sympathetic, as you say, to government using something else and ordinary people using something else as a substitute for the system that's slowly becoming inaccessible and unwieldy. And that's happened a lot of time in history. And that doesn't have that much to do with AI or surveillance per se. That's just, we've screwed our legal system. We've let it go bad. And I don't, and if you say constitutional protections, well, that's mostly about this official legal system, which again is going bad. So yeah, let's try to fix it if we can. But if we don't, I do have to expect we will continue to use substitute systems in many regimes, including government rendition of aliens, but all sorts of other systems in our world. Yes, those other systems will probably make use of surveillance evidence, which is going to be increasingly available, and AI to integrate when that's feasible and available. But I don't think the AI is the major issue. It's more surveillance and the breaking of our legal system.
But the incentives for this, if you think about the more dollars, the more the government encourages and facilitates this. And of course, the government would like to be able to surveil. Of course, the government would like to eliminate the need for a subpoena or a warrant. So to the extent that if there's surveillance platforms out there, and because of the third-party doctrine, the government can get all this information, just telling the platforms, either I'll buy it from you, I'll be your
Yep.
partner, or give it to me. So
Yep.
the government will now have a lot more information that it would have needed to get a warrant or subpoena for.
Indeed.
There will no longer need to be warrants, for, or they might just all be administrative warrants that, that shouldn't even be considered a warrant because the conditions
Right.
for getting it are so low. So I view many people might be, so these platforms, all including the government, have an incentive to convince people that our system is so broken and this is the way we should go. So there's a lot of money that would
Sure.
be advocating for this, and a lot more money would be advocating for it than the money that probably would go towards saying, warning about it. Not that there would be, it's like the public choice theory, right? The benefits are very concentrated, and there's a lot of money at risk for it, and then you'd have to get a lot of highly motivated, citizens who probably would not be able to put all the money together to compete on a financial basis, but hopefully they would be able to get, masses of people out there, who would speak out vociferously and continuously to a point that they might offset the voice of, all the money behind this and all the propaganda behind it. But clearly there would be an aligned interest between all the companies spending, a lot of money on this, all the municipalities that have the data centers, that they don't want to see the data centers go away. So if you see all the interest that would align with, with the Palantirs of the world, that they probably would have, an advantage in the political arena over, people who would be victims of this. Again, it's the concentrated benefits and diffuse costs. So
Right.
It's not going to be a fair fight.
When a legal system starts to break and people are open to alternatives, no doubt people will use their incentives and interests to push particular alternatives that would favor them. But nevertheless, this is just, that's also true for when governments collapse and a new governments form, or even when revolutions happen, et cetera. When old systems get big and break, then there's opportunism about what system comes to replace it. But
so the argument would be, if we did a better job preserving our existing system, that would then these other alternatives would be less appealing, because what makes them more appealing is that we're already so messed up. So we've already lost trust in our current systems, and that makes us more prone to try something new. But that also increases the propaganda about promoting the fact how bad our system is.
So for example, in the Middle Ages, we've all heard about trial by ordeal, right? I don't know, they throw somebody into a lake and see if they drowned, and if they drowned, they were guilty, and if they didn't drown, they were innocent, or something like that. You think, well, what kind of a stupid legal system was that? How could they be so stupid? Well, they had a perfectly functioning legal system that they had inherited from the Romans, but it was complicated and expensive and in Latin, and nobody spoke Latin anymore, or it's really expensive to get them. And so they just made up new legal systems that they used instead of the official legal system that was still in the background, because it had become inaccessible and useless. So we've seen that many times in history. You might have said, trial by ordeal, that's really stupid. Why don't we use the old Roman system? See how good it was? And people would say, well, where's your Latin lawyer? Because I don't have one, you don't have one, and it's all in Latin, right? So, but that's the sort of thing that slowly could be happening now, which is our system is getting ponderous and expensive and politicized. And, that's the problem. But this isn't that much about AI, I would say. So, do you have any other AI issues, or issues that are closer to AI than maybe, surveillance leading to alternative legal systems?
Well, the other thing is, I like to, in using, I've used a couple of the AI agents to sort of like see if I can determine their biases. So I have conversations with them.
And they do have them, absolutely. And many people have charted those things. But in a competitive environment, you'll be able to choose ones with biases more to your liking. And if there was a central player,
it's a private use of AI, not a public use of AI.
Of course.
So a private use of AI is, you can use the AI to help reinforce whatever biases you have or challenge it, and that's a function of the questions you ask it and how you interact with it. It's happy to it's happy to mimic you to make you feel happy, or if you force it to engage and criticize, it'll do that. But you have to know how to you have to look
Sure.
to accomplish that outcome, rather than it's the natural outcome it'll produce. And again, that's private preferences. And then the question is what else is with each interaction, with each keystroke you have with an AI, who owns that information, and how else is that information being used? So
And if we had a flexible enough legal system, then different AI firms would offer you different contracts in terms of who owns what, and there'd be competition among those, and we find out which ones people end up choosing, and that might be more efficient. So these are familiar issues of commerce. It's in a particular new form with a particular new product, but these don't seem like things that'll cause huge problems in the world. They're just a way in which we're going to explore a particular new technology and work out our defaults and presumptions about them, and figure out which products we like best and who wins the competition for customer loyalty. But is that really a worry here, or what would be the biggest worry you might have about AI? I gave you a big list of the more bigger worries people have had. If it's really just, do I own it or do they own it? Like, isn't that just, well, some of them offer you the contract where you own it, and some of them offer the contract where they own it, and you decide which product you like.
You would think that competition would deal with that issue. I have not really looked at. I see there are allegations on how certain platforms are using that data and sharing with it. I think as I've looked at the terms of service and privacy guidelines, they're kind of vague. So
right. You should be more worried about social media, in the sense that it does look like social media had stronger network effects, whereby if there was a dominant social media, it would be expensive to switch, and therefore they had a lot of market power to push terms like this on you, where the AIs are actually in a more competitive situation.
You do have the marriage of social media. Well, you have Grok and integrated into X.
The major market power of X isn't Grok. Grok isn't the main reason why it has market power, right? It's just the network effect of social media that gives it market power.
And there's been some discussions and a little small movement. So ChatGPT also entering into social media. So you might see maybe more competition in social media as a result of these AI platforms. Because that's how they might have to compete, is by offering more bells and whistles to the platform in order to get the engagement on it. So I'm not sure about that. So and I am concerned about, also from social media perspective, as a person who has done investments in quote social media platforms, and I think Snowden's description of them was more accurate when he said they're surveillance platforms masquerading as social media platforms, because their whole economics of their platform is based upon doing something with what their surveillance is. So they're surveilling all the time.
But clearly, that's not the main. Clearly, the main way in which social media has power is because customers like to use it. Because of that, then they have the ability to collect data and sell it for other purposes. But if they were just selling data, it wouldn't work. It has to be because customers like to use them, right?
I'll tell you why I don't agree with that statement. Okay, in the beginning, when these platforms started, they made privacy guarantees. Okay, so when they hadn't scaled, then at that point in time, the user had a lot of bargaining leverage. So therefore, they were very user friendly.
Because there were a number of competing ones.
Once they got to scale, then they said basically you now have a huge following here. You begin to monetize it. Okay,
right, but that's market power. Because of the network effect, they have the market power to say, do things our way or go somewhere else. And the other
but again, what made them popular the promises that made them popular, okay, it was not that, hey, come join Facebook, we're going to surveil you, everything you do, and we're going to sell your data. That they, if they would have come out saying that, they probably never would have scaled. They scaled saying, don't worry, we're just here we are, we're holding your data for you, but
Sure,
we're not
but
using it. So they all made privacy promises. As a matter of fact, recent, in the case, in the case that around 2017, 2018, I can't remember what year, where Facebook, Meta, whatever, signed a consent decree where they agreed to pay a certain sum of money. That consent decree was them acknowledging they already violated a previous consent decree, regarding the use of
right. Well,
data.
sounds
So,
like you have a complaint about law here. You say, but they promised and they're getting away with breaking the promise. Then what you want is a law that would more strictly enforce a promise. That's what contract law is about. So either you didn't have a strong enough contract with them, or you think the legal system that interpreted that contract was inadequate.
I didn't use any of these platforms precisely for that reason. Or for what?
Okay,
that,
but you still have a complaint that customers were tricked and misled because of a lack of contract law. So again, this is a complaint about law. You say they promised and they broke their promise and they get away with it. That's a complaint about law enforcing promises.
Yeah, and yes, and basically, I don't know if you followed the case. In the case, the judge who had to agree to the consent decree said, basically the judge, I can't remember his precise words, but the judge made a comment basically saying, legally there's nothing I can do. I have to sign off on the consent decree, but the conditions,
Okay.
but the agreement is absurd. So basically,
Okay, but
the judge made the point of saying is the government negotiated a sweetheart deal, and this was the Trump administration.
Since we've titled this episode about AI, we should try one more time to find something about AI that you're worried about. So far you're worried about law, you're worried about surveillance, you're worried about social media, market power. You don't seem actually very worried about AI.
Well, yes, I am worried about AI because of the surveillance aspects,
but AI isn't surveillance. Surveillance would be there without the AI, and surveillance would cause all the problems you're worried about without the AI. It's not the AI that bothers you, but surveillance.
Every interaction people have with AI is a surveillance of the individual that's interacting with AI. So, and that's private information that a few companies are getting, with what seemingly seems to be some help from the government, help from the government.
The customers seem to be okay with the arrangement relative to their options. So either you're saying the customers are stupid, or they're being promised things that they aren't going to deliver because the law is inadequate to enforce promises. That's not about the AI per se. It's about any product people would be using, and producing information about them through the use of that product. This isn't about AI in particular. It's just about the fact that people are using AI. That's the thing that bugs you.
Yes, I think it's fair to say the fact that the government has not. Yes, I probably what I'm mostly arguing at this point in time, you're correctly pointing out, is a bad legal system with respect to the protection of our privacy and our data, and the fact that when we interact in some of these programs, the question is because to what extent should we have conversations with the AI and have it have the expectation of privacy or not having privacy? If we're speaking with the AI, is it like speaking with a friend or speaking with something else, and it's a private conversation, and because you had it with an AI, whatever information the AI had doesn't have the right to. The question is whose property. This whole thing about, and maybe we can talk a little more, then we'll go into what you would like to talk about AI, because I'm not doing a good job of talking about AI. But I will say this with respect to data. I have been, and I wrote a data manifesto a number of years ago. I think it is. I think we have property rights to our data. Typically, in almost every aspect of transactions where you're conveying something, the act of conveyance has a document that supports it. The act of conveyance says, it's mine, I'm conveying it to you for this value, and so, so there's an official document that says, I've sold all rights, to this type of stuff, and it's a very explicit, explicit transactions. I find that the terms of service are not really very explicit about basically saying, on the most part, is that whatever you put up there is now their property, and you've given them a license, exclusive license that you get, that is only paid for by continuing to access the platform, and in return for access to platform, you've sold everything that you put up there to the platform, and they become the owners of everything you publish there. Now becomes their property to use at their sole discretion. So but let me go further as part of the legal system. We'll go back to AI. So now the platforms say, I have immunity from the content because it's not my content, it's user generated content. But I'm now claiming property to that user generated content. But I own it, I monetize it, but I have no liability associated with it. So there's very little in life that somebody gets to say, this is mine, I get to make money off of it, but what is mine that I get to make money off of it, I also have no responsibility for as with respect to the liability side. Okay, so this is sort of like, so my problem with this whole industry, it's all predicated upon this type of legal fictions that don't exist anywhere else in our life.
So there's two issues. One is this: should this be an available option for contract? If we have two parties contracting with each other, should this be one of the options that they could pick? And then, is it actually possible to pick another option? That is, could a company offer you a social media service and say, this is a different deal, we're going to have you a different deal, or an AI service?
Robin, let me put it. The option would exist if 230 is something the government did. That's government intervention. Government intervention. Prior to 230, the common law system basically said, if you're a host and you're not doing any sort of if you're not doing any sort of surveillance, you don't have rules, you're acting as like a public forum, that you're not surveilling, that was given already. Common law system gave that immunity. So, but if you had knowledge on something that was yours and you were creating rules on a platform that you owned, you controlled, and you were surveilling, then whatever's there, you're responsible for. So the reason why these platforms can get away with this is the government basically said, I'm going to create an exception for you that I don't do for anyone else, because I don't want free speech. I want you to moderate it. So my way of encouraging you to moderating it is I'm going to let you moderate the way you want and hold you completely immunity. But the second issue now is the consequence of that is that what they're moderating that they don't have liability for, they still get to treat as theirs and monetize it. So
is that a default, or is it a requirement that everybody have this deal? That's the key, contract.
Everybody has the deal. Well, who's going to turn down the deal of immunity?
If a competitor could offer a different deal to customers and then compete on that, having that different deal, and if customers cared enough, then customers would push the alternative deal. If this was just a default, if we're saying no, everybody must have this contract relationship, then we're limiting the range of options that suppliers could offer. And then you could reasonably complain the market's been limited.
If by the time the government gets around to it, platforms have already scaled, then obviously the switching cost is very high. So if I'm already on a platform that I have a deal, that they changed the deal with me, but during the period of time from when I initially contacted the deal to today, and the reason why I was able to grow was because I had this subsidy of called Section 230, and that helped me grow. Then as I grow, my bargaining leverage has changed so that now I can cram down people because another platform comes and has to start. You have no followers. So, but what got it was the law helped facilitate this process. It wasn't just like a free market choice. These platforms all would have behaved differently if Section 230 didn't exist.
As an economist, I would just say that I would prefer a open competition where these different agreements were available as options for people to choose. And if the government is pushing on some of the options over others, then that could distort the competition that results. But I'd also have to say, I'm not actually that sure about how much privacy is the optimal amount of privacy that there should be in the world, or who should exactly get these property rights. I would have to do a deeper analysis to judge that. I see arguments both ways on privacy and these various property rights, but I can see that you care about which version of these products care, and you would want more privacy than we have now. And so I was influenced by a friend of mine, David Brin's book, The Transparent Societies from '98, where he was arguing that, this was 28 years ago, that, we're facing a world of more surveillance and privacy is going to be hard to defend. And he was more arguing, well, we should just prioritize having authorities lose privacy as well as the rest of us. And he was willing to, accept that sort of a deal, but that's not what we've done. But I still think it's just not obvious which privacy is better. But I also don't think AI is very much about privacy. That is.
Okay. What is AI to you? I mean,
so I listed these big issues before.
For AI to be decent, okay, it needs a lot of data, right?
There's lots of ways to get data, and it could get it by contract. So the question is,
well, most of them are not getting it by contract. Some are buying, but there's a lot of scraping going on.
But I mean, economically, if the value
to them, a lot of it through scraping,
right? But it's still, if the value to them for the information was more than the cost that people would lose by giving the information, then it would be economically efficient for them to get the information. Just a matter of agreeing on a price and the deal to transfer it, right?
When you take a look at markets, okay, let me look this way. What if the government didn't have? What if the government was prohibited from buying data? Let's say the people said it's the government, which should be the case, is the government should not be any data the government gets against us. Okay, it should require a warrant. Okay, so if the legal system protected our data so that if we give it to a third party because we're busy having a conversation and the government wants it without any probable cause and the government wants to pay for 30, because we got to, the point I'm trying to make is you're saying it's a marketplace, okay? I'm saying it's a marketplace distorted by government policy, government intervention, and government money, which does not make it a free market.
Right. But
so
in order to
so the economics might be driven by the government, not by the private sector.
Okay, but as an economist, when I look at a thing happening in the world, if I see a distortion of the free market, say, and something's pushing in a direction, that's not enough to me to decide it's bad. I have to have an independent evaluation. Well, is that a good or bad direction to be pushing? And in order to do that, I have to imagine a free market and then imagine what would happen in that free market and guess how that would compare to what's actually happening. That's the spirit in which I'm saying.
If you see the platforms like Palantir and out there, the announcement of the huge contracts they have is with government entities. Okay,
sure, but I still have to wonder: is it on average economically efficient for them to have this information and use it? That's what I have to do to evaluate these choices, decide if they're good or bad.
So the question is if your calculus is it efficient for the so yes, I can understand it is efficient for the government instead of having to get warrants and subpoenas against individuals like the Constitution provides, is that the government help support, fund, provide other regulatory exemptions and other ways of facilitating these companies of amassing all this data that people are amassing because there is some utility to it. But the question is the people getting utility for it, the revenues they would you can't charge them enough money for these companies to be in business. So in order to sustain offering a product that's valuable to the consumer, you have to have the government. You have to have the government money from the government, and the government says, "Gee, yes, it's very efficient. It is very inefficient. I hate due process. I hate the Constitution. I don't want to have to deal with the Constitution. I want to get around the Constitution." So yes, it is inefficient for the government, to use it to get around the Constitution. So in that respect, yes, for the government, it's really efficient.
Right. But the economist standard isn't about the government; it's about society as a whole. We have to ask, for example, many people decades ago noticed that
this is the problem. Let me ask you, when you talk about society, we have rights that the society can't take away from us. So that's not an economically efficient argument. You can't use an efficiency argument to violate our inalienable rights. I mean,
except
so
I can use an efficiency, and I will use an efficiency argument to ask, should you have those rights? Which rights should people have? In order to figure out what rights are good rights to have, we have to do some evaluating compared to a standard. We need a standard that's independent of the rights to compare them to.
Didn't we get people? Didn't we get people who? And again, we can have a conversation about. We're getting off the AI topic, but this is interesting. So we signed a compact where the people agreed to a compact because they limited the government. This was not for subject to negotiation. The people said, we'll give you these powers conditional upon you always respecting these things. This is things you're committing that will let you exist if you agree never to trespass this. Okay, so there is a compact, a contract that already prevents it. So you can't use an efficiency argument to say, I've decided it's not convenient for me to live up to. You gave me all this power, but I only have legitimate use of this power if I respect the restrictions you placed on me.
As you know, the world has been going along for many centuries, and at various times, various people make deals, and then later on they renege on those deals, and various, stuff happens. And that's part of the history of deals is
the history of deals is usually if somebody breaches that there's a remedy associated with breach.
Well, it depends on what legal system you have and what powers that legal system has to enforce the deal. That's often what people
we had a whole bunch of people who wrote this document who tried to convince people to say it, and basically said if the government that tries to break this deal, you should treat that government as being illegitimate. So
they said that, but then later on, stuff happened.
Yeah, because the government armed itself.
People did not have the overwhelming devotion to the initial deal that you would like them to have had, and that's part of why we aren't there anymore.
But the question is does an individual? Again, this is again. Does an individual have a right because they think it's efficient for them to also take it away from me, even though I don't think it's efficient for me? If a government said basically, this is your right, we can't tread on it, we can't trespass it, we can't trample it. That was something that was given to every individual. So there's no document that says people can't. Madison said we have property in our rights and rights in our property. So basically, people tramping on my rights are people like coming into my house and stealing my food and my furniture and my money and my jewelry and saying, well, it's economically efficient, I don't want to work, and I got a whole bunch of people in this neighborhood that would rather live off the assets that you have in your house, and the government says, I don't like Jeffrey Wernick, so I'm going to do nothing about it. Okay, but that might be efficient, but
we have, and our point in this history, we are the descendants of centuries, thousands of years of various peoples doing various things and making various deals, and then creating various systems which they claim have various purposes and intentions. And in that long history, they've broken a lot of those deals and gotten away with that. And I, at this point, have to look at the various, remainders of deals sitting around or expectations people have, and I have to decide which of those to support. Which am I going to put more energy into trying to maintain or support compared to the others? And the only way I can do that is to have some standard of evaluation, which is different than all deals must always be kept. And my standard of evaluation is going to be this economic one of, okay, but what's on average better?
Every deal, almost every deal has clauses in those deals to say, if we have a dispute, this is how we resolve the dispute. So,
and that's what we did. That's what the U.S. Constitution did. It set up processes for changing it.
If there's relative power differences, where people say I can get away with that, yes, maybe that's the world people want to have, and basically say, I'll keep to a contract when it benefits me, and when it doesn't benefit me, I'll exit. And I'll be able to exit because if the person comes back to complain, I'll kill them, and they'll know I'll kill them. So, because I have the ability to kill them, or I have the ability to harass them, or whatever it is. So therefore, they'll accept because I have significant bargaining leverage.
And now, the fact is, almost all deals that were made in the expectation of that sort of thing happening later. That is, people weren't stupid. They knew that they had limited ability to make and enforce deals, and they made the deals they could, expecting that later on people might well opportunistically renege on their deals or evade them if that was possible. And that's when people design a system like the US Constitution, they are designing it anticipating those sorts of moves to be made later. And then the question is, when those moves are made and we are centuries later, what do we do about it? Yeah. That's our question right now. And I'm happy to maybe on the margin decide, yeah, I want the US Constitution to be supported more. But in order to decide that, I have to have an independent standard of evaluation. That's my key argument here. Yeah. I can't just say, I am devoted to the US Constitution as a matter of principle, no matter what. I have to ask, well, what do I think will happen if we support the Constitution? And what if we don't? And I have to evaluate these two things by some independent standard. And then I may well say, yay, Constitution, I'm pro-Constitution, right? But I won't just do that on the basis of an axiom that the US Constitution was the best deal that was ever made, and therefore everything should be oriented around making sure the US Constitution deal gets, preserved. That's not my axiom.
Yeah, but and my perspective is a little bit different. My perspective is, well, first is I don't really believe the Constitution has authority to the respect that, none of us ever consented to the document, so we inherited a document we didn't explicitly consent to, which I don't think is a good idea. So, so maybe for pragmatism, it seems to make sense, but philosophically, it doesn't make sense to me. That's my personal opinion. But with respect to the premise of the Constitution, that the only reason people consented to create a government was that government acknowledged inalienable rights, okay, I've already been promised those inalienable rights, and I've been told that, what being by being, as long as I'm in the jurisdiction, that this entity agreed that it only had legitimacy if it respected those rights, and if it didn't respect the rights, then it didn't have legitimacy. Now the question is, can it have force and bargaining leverage where it doesn't matter whether it's legitimate or not? It's what they can get away with, So yes, I understand we live in a world that if you accumulate enough power, rules don't apply to you because you have the force to get away with it, not because people think it's right. It's because people don't think they have a choice.
Unless we make a stronger system to constrain those opportunistic moves. And I'm happy to try to think about ways to do that. And as you may know, I have many ideas for how we should reform the legal system to do better, but I'm going to be realistic about the situation we're in.
Yes.
Let's take a few minutes to go back to AI here, just in the last few minutes.
I want to tell you a funny story, though. I had this, I owned this piece of this office building, small office building, and I had a tenant, and this tenant was an ad agency, okay? So it's a funny thing. I'll tell you this. So this ad agency was also, this is a piece of real estate I had in Mexico. And it just so happened that the head of the ad agency was also a consultant to the incoming president's administration. So he was a very politically connected person. And he wrote columns on ethics in business. So he comes to me, says, hi, Jeff, I want to walk away from my lease. What can we negotiate? So I said, I don't know why we're having this conversation. I have we have a contract. The contract says I have to make space available to you. I'm making it available to you exclusively. You've accepted this, and you have rent to pay up until the expiration date. Whether you use the space or not is irrelevant. The only thing I'm obligated to do is make it available to you on an exclusive basis. Okay. You asked for that, and
if he paid you enough, you might change it, right?
Whether you're there or not, right, is irrelevant to me. So I don't know why we're having this conversation. If you dispute what the contract means, take me to court. But I'm not talking to you. So he said, let's have breakfast one morning. So I said, oh, okay, I'll be nice. I'll have breakfast. And so I clipped all the articles out of that where he talked about keeping your word and keeping contracts and all the things that prove that what he was asking me to do is what he would tell other people not to do. So we're sitting at this nice restaurant, where he's having this conversation. Again, I tell him, I said, look, he says, I'm not doing anything for you. I don't care whether you stay in the space or not. I'm collecting all the rent. And if you sue me, okay, it's going to be worse for you because I'm going to win and you're going to pay me damages. So
Right.
but go ahead. I'm happy. I look forward to suing you. I'm just going to it's a more profitable relationship for me if you sue me. So, so then I asked the question. I said, for you right now, it's convenient. It's convenient to walk away because you merged and you don't need the space. And so you're coming to me with an argument of convenience. What if I came to you 1 year into your contract and I could find a tenant for twice the rent you were paying? And it was convenient for me to say, get the hell out because I can make twice the money.
Right.
Are you going to say it's okay because it's convenient for you? Or are you going to show me the contract telling me I don't have the right to do that? So the same contract that you would use to protect the fact that you had exclusive use of the space, okay? It's a double-edged sword, okay? So if it was convenient for me to get rid of you, you wouldn't let me do it. If it's convenient for you to leave, I'm not letting you do it, okay? Simple. So you're going to pay me. One way or another, you're going to pay me, okay? Either by writing a check now or me suing you or you suing me, and we'll see what happens with the courts will happen. But I'm indifferent to either way. So and then I pulled out the articles and I said, okay, let's review some of the things that you've said, and so I started reading him some of his own words, and I say, which person am I speaking to? So then he said something incredibly stupid. He said, well, you had my signature, but now you have my word. So you're saying I should trust your word when you're telling me I shouldn't trust your signature. I assumed at the time your signature was you confirming your word. So now you're telling me your signature is completely independent of your word. So, it is your signature, right? You signed it. Your signature was witnessed. So are you saying he was silent when you signed? So he ended up picking up. He threw coffee on me. He threw water on me, and he walked out.
But he still paid.
But he paid.
Okay. Right. I mean, but as you know, sometimes you don't have as strong a position as you had in that case, where even though you legally have terms in your favor, you will find them hard to enforce. And in those cases, you would be more accommodating in making a deal, even though you might wish you had a stronger legal system.
Not my person. I'll tell you one other story because this illustrates that point on why that's not how I behave.
You made a reputation for having you've developed a reputation. You're getting the benefits now from having a commitment to saying, no, I'm not going to make these deals. And that's a perfectly plausible business strategy.
I became part owner of this business also in Mexico, was oil services company. They had signed an agreement with this third party to help manage one of the facilities there. It was a foundry. So, I wanted to exit the agreement. So exiting the agreement, I think I had a good case to exit the agreement, but it would have been, Mexican legal system. The facts were in my favor, but you also have the uncertainty of the Mexican legal system.
Right.
So the certainty can work for you or against you. So so what I did is I went to Chicago, which is where the other company was, and I met with their chief negotiator and their lawyer, and so we're sitting down for having breakfast, and I tell them, call the plant. So why should we call the plant? Amuse me, just call the plant. Call the people who are your agents at the plant. So he calls the plant, and the people said, we're not allowed onto the facility. So I said, for you, for all intents and purposes, this contract is over. Your people are not coming in. So I wanted to see your face when I tell you this, that they're not entitled to come in. My security will never let them on the property again. I'm treating this contract as if it's null and void. Take me to court, or not, or here's a document where you're basically going to hold everything harmless. They started getting out of the law and whatever. I said, look, if you want to go to court, go to court. Maybe you'll win, maybe you'll lose, but there's a chance you'll lose. I would suggest you sign this right now, but you can't keep them out. I said, well, it doesn't matter. Well, can't go to court and get forced exit. See how long it's going to take you to get the courts affirm your right to enter the property. It's I'm gonna hold this up. By the time you get the right to go back onto the property, the contract will have expired. So you got as a practical reality is you might be right, but for you to exercise your rights, this contract will have expired, before you'll be able to get people on. So they signed that
Right.
deal. They also threw something at me when they left.
Okay, but in that case, you said, I know that we have this contract with words, but you said, look at my negotiating leverage here because of the uncertainty and delay in the enforcement of the law, and then you're willing to use that as a negotiating leverage in renegotiating deals, right?
Right.
And that's fine, but that's the whole point, is that if we want a stronger legal system that more strictly enforces deals, we should work to create that. But when we don't have it, we will all expect everybody to be opportunistic about taking advantage of the limited enforcement of the system we have.
Yeah, but I think also to do what I did also requires a sense of character. Not many people in the same situation would have behaved the way I had done, because they would have.
That is presumably one of your strengths as a business person, is you have developed a reputation for a steely sort of determination to follow certain sort of business strategies and willing to take the risk of the downsides that might follow and dare other people if they want to go, if they're willing to oppose you and take some of the risks. And no doubt that's worked for you.
So we spent most of the time talking about how bad.
Yeah, well, maybe we'll talk some other time about AI, but if so, we'll have to actually talk about AI.
In some time that we have left, why don't I just let you talk about what you're most concerned about at AI? You choose the issue that's most near and dear to you, important to you, and why don't we spend a little bit of time on that?
Well, let me just maybe 5 minutes, because I really have to go to another meeting here.
Sorry.
So two issues. Well, the biggest issue is, if you look at the entire history of people concerned about AI and automation for at least 2 centuries, the biggest, most robust concern is humans losing their jobs, perhaps suddenly, perhaps dramatically. Now, that doesn't have to happen. It could be that humans never lose their jobs, or more likely, they slowly lose their jobs over, say, several generations, in which case there's plenty of time to adapt to the situation as you slowly see the realization of the economy growing due to automation and AI. But there is a substantial risk worth considering that this might happen in a short period. Say, a marker might be US labor force participation rate, which now is above 60%, according to the official number. What if in a 5-year period that fell below 30%? That would be a pretty clear sign that a lot of people had lost jobs, most likely due to automation. It'd be very hard to imagine another event that would cause such a decline so large and so fast. A lot of people out there don't own much capital besides their ability to work. That is, their main capital is the fact that they are skilled and able to work. And if this thing were to happen, they would basically suddenly lose most of their capital and they wouldn't plausibly be able to survive. Now, some people think we're just going to have government fix this problem by, say, having a UBI it hands out to people who need it whenever this thing happens. But this new AI economy doesn't plausibly have to be equally distributed through the world economy. It might well be very concentrated in particular cities or nations, in which case all the other nations that are planning to tax their local AI economy to pay for a UBI, that's not going to work. There's not going to be a local economy to tax. And so that won't solve their problem. So I think we do have a straightforward way to address this problem that still would be effective now, which is private insurance against this risk. And because this is a shared risk, you don't actually need individual underwriting. You can do this through a derivative, financial asset derivative. That is the idea where you take some large, market asset like the S&P 500, Wilshire 500, real estate REITs, et cetera. You just take a big bundle asset that just covers the economy and you split it by a bet. The bet would be, in a particular 5-year period, will this number drop from above 60 to below 30? If so, one side of the bet pays off. Otherwise, the other side of the bet pays off. So if you aren't facing much of a risk of losing your job in a 5-year period, if you buy the other side of the bet, you'll get a risk premium and a higher rate of return on average for holding that. And then if you do face an unusual, a risk of losing your job in that 5-year period and suffering as a result, then you buy the other side of the bet, which pays off in that event. And then because at the moment, the chance of that in any one 5-year period is still going to be less than 10%, probably less than 5%, pretty low. You have a high leverage. you'll get a large payoff in that event for a low premium, and then you can insure. So if we just made this asset available to people and told them that if you're worried about this, buy this asset, that would work. And this asset is basically a reinsured global asset. So it's not dependent on your local economy. And maybe even your employer, if it wants to show that it cares about you and this issue for your future, it could buy this asset for you as an employee benefit. There are many firms who want to show their concern about AI with respect to employee risks. And so I would think they would be the best first customer to offer this product. So in any way, this is, to me, the obvious, most robust policy response to the biggest risk of AI that people have consistently identified for many centuries. And it bothers me that nobody's really doing this. People are talking a lot about all sorts of other AI risks that are lower and less serious than this, but like this is the most robust one. We know what to do basically, and we're not doing it.
I have a friend that likes to do financial engineering, so I will hook the two of you up, and maybe you have a conversation.
Happy to talk to them,
and together that you can put something together and hopefully produce this financial product that you think adds value. Going back to the economics argument that you made, then that basically means everybody, if it's well understood by all users of AI, that the consequences of using AI means a certain element of society are likely to use their job as a result of its use. It means everyone who's using AI understand that trade-off is an acceptable trade-off.
Well, even if they didn't use AI, the risk is still there if lots of other people use it. So this is
right. I'm saying is whoever is using it is comfortable with that trade-off. Like if I'm using something knowing that me and other people using it will create this consequence, and I still use it, it means to me the value for me using it is greater than the cost that my using it creates for a third party. And
you even have a stronger argument, which is if you know that people could in fact insure against this risk and that they have insured against it to the degree they want to, then you can expect that the value that you get from this product being higher than the cost of it to you means that it is overall socially valuable, because whatever this risk is already being priced in because of these other people having bought the insurance to cover the risk.
Yes, I strongly agree with that argument. The fact is, if there are risks out there, the whole point of marketplace is that risks should be able to be priced and transferred, and risk should be absorbed by the people most willing to absorb it, and people who don't want to assume a risk should pay a cost to those willing to assume a risk. And if they come at a price where they each feel satisfied, on a risk return basis, they've been able to transfer it on mutually agreeable terms. We should have, as economists, as studying from an economic perspective, we want markets to be as complete as possible. And if a market outcome can't be hedged, it's not complete.
All right, so I think we have to stop it there and continue this again some other time.
No, let's not stop it with my last word. Even if you only have a minute, let's stop it with your last word. So,
we have talked about an interesting topic, which is the degree to which surveillance and privacy is a free market choice versus a government-imposed deal. And the extent we're concerned, perhaps, that social media sites, given their large market power, once they finally become established, you might have doubts about whether the deals you have with them are efficient, although I see a literature that might question that the other way. But these are, in fact, valid issues. And we've also talked about to what extent should the U.S. Constitution deal, influence our choices today, or to what extent do we want to try to make that deal stronger or more vivid or more compelling to people as a norm that they should be trying to follow it. That's also an interesting question with respect to our world today. And we've talked about law and to what extent, if law is breaking, people would be legitimately tempted to use other institutions, and then to what extent might opportunists take advantage of that switch to push for options that favor them.
Well, thank you very much. So,
all right.
So maybe we should reschedule, and I should just shut my mouth next time and give you the opportunity of.
Or we could, if you are it depends on how interested you are in the topic. Maybe just aren't that interested in the AI risk topic, but to the extent you are, then we could focus on other AI topics.
Yes, your perspective is something I didn't consider, and I think it's worth exploring. And I didn't give you enough time to explore it. That's my
Right.
bad. And so
But
yes, we should do this
this will
again.
have to be enough for today.
Okay, bye, Robin.
Take care.